Hello everyone. Good afternoon or good morning or maybe evening for those of you who are not located in the Netherlands. I'm very happy to welcome you to this webinar about exporting certified sustainable seafood to the European fish and seafood market. This webinar is organized by CBI, the Center for the Promotion of Imports from Developing Countries. I've moderated a few of these webinars before, but for those of you who do not know me yet, my name is Sanne Bogers. I'm a Program Manager Market Intelligence at CBI and among others responsible for the fish and seafood sector. CBI is part of the Netherlands Enterprise Agency and we are funded mainly by the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Through our work, we support the transition to more sustainable and inclusive economies by helping SMEs to export, in particular to Europe. We do that in several ways. We have projects in a number of countries, especially in Africa and Asia, in which we help exporters to become successful on the European market. CBI also offers market intelligence on the European market for 14 different sectors, ranging from fish and seafood to natural ingredients for health products and to tourism and apparel. Our market intelligence is specifically aimed at exporters from emerging economies. It's free and it contains a lot of tips on how to best enter the European market. Our market research for the fish and seafood sector is conducted by Seafood Tip. And today, market researcher Mariska Bottema will present to you the key findings of a new study about the market for certified sustainable seafood. Next to that, we have a guest speaker, Eva van Heukelom, the Partnership Manager of the Global Sustainable Seafood Initiative. I'm very happy that she is willing to contribute to this webinar too. The webinar will take about 75 minutes. Mariska, can you go back one slide? After the introduction of the speakers, Mariska will present to you the outline of the webinar. And we have 2 blocks for questions and answers. At the end of the webinar, I will give you some more information about the market intelligence CBI offers. Some practical aspects. We cannot see or hear you. So if you have any questions or remarks, please put them in the chat box. Also, if you have any technical questions, we will try to help you out. During the webinar, we will make use of a few polls, and it's nice if you participate by answering them. This webinar is recorded and will be published on our website so that you can watch it again or share it with others who might be interested. The PowerPoint presentation will be sent to you a couple of days after the webinar. If you have any audio problems, please try a phone call among the audio options. The tariff should be local or even toll-free. And lastly, we kindly request you to fill the short survey at the end of the webinar. It is important for us to receive your feedback in order to improve future webinars. Okay, then I will now give the floor to Mariska and Eva for their introductions. And I wish you all a very interesting and useful webinar.
Thank you for the introduction, Sanne. Hi, everybody. My name is Mariska. I'm a senior analyst at Seafood Tip, which is a member-based platform that provides market intelligence in the seafood supply chain. And today I will present this webinar on exporting sustainable seafood together with a special guest, Eva van Heukelom, who is joining us from GSSI. Eva, perhaps you can introduce yourself as well.
Thanks, Mariska. Hi, everyone. It's good to be with you today. My name is Eva van Heukelom, and I'm the Partnership Manager at GSSI, which stands for the Global Sustainable Seafood Initiative. We're a not-for-profit partnership. We're based in the Netherlands, but we're working globally with different stakeholders towards more sustainable seafood for everyone. I'm really excited to tell you a bit more about our work and potential benefits that we provide to help producers exporting to the European market. Thank you.
Thanks, Eva. So I'll start with telling you what the contents of our webinar is today. We're going to start with talking to you about what sustainable seafood really is, and Eva will tell us a little bit more about GSSI and what they do. Then I will talk about what it is that makes Europe an interesting market for sustainable seafood. And then we'll have a short Q&A, so you'll be able to ask us questions that you have. And then I'll talk about some main trends that we see coming up in the sustainable seafood environment. And finally, I will talk about organizing sustainability throughout your supply chain. And at the end, you can ask us questions again. So one of the things that has motivated the development of this webinar is the fact that sustainable seafood is on the rise in Europe. So let's start with a poll question to warm ourselves up for this webinar. So my question to you is, what do you think has driven the growth of sustainable seafood in the last couple of years? Is this the growing awareness of consumers about the sustainability of seafood production? Or is it government policies towards improving the sustainability of seafood production and trade? Or is it commitments that retailers have made to sell only sustainable seafood in the supermarkets? Please fill in your answer in the poll.
Mariska, I see that 70% has voted. Shall I close the poll?
Yes, please. So I see that most of you have answered the consumer awareness is what has driven the growth of sustainable seafood in the last couple of years. And the answer to this question is actually, of course, all three factors. They've all contributed to the growth of sustainable seafood. However, it is actually primarily retailer commitments that have driven this in the last couple of years. But I'm going to tell you more about that in the next slide. So what is sustainable seafood? Sustainable seafood is seafood that is caught or farmed using methods that do not harm a single species or ecosystem. Therefore, it is produced in a way that ensures that future generations can still benefit from the world's aquatic resources. Perhaps you've heard people talk about the sustainable seafood movement, but what is it? The sustainable seafood movement began in the mid-1990s and encourages the consumption of sustainable seafood. The movement encourages consumers to ask for sustainable seafood products, and in this way involves consumers to be part of the solution to environmental problems. Now, over the past years, we've seen that seafood consumers are becoming more conscious of the environmental and social impact associated with seafood production. As such, a growing number of them are paying attention to how food is produced, where it comes from, and whether it is good for their health, for people, and for the planet. However, although consumer awareness has played a role, the growth of the demand for sustainable seafood can really be attributed to the sourcing commitment made by international retail groups. So European and North American retailers started making commitments to sell only sustainable seafood in their supermarkets, resulting in a significant increase in demand for certified seafood products. It is important to keep in mind that every retailer has distinct sourcing commitments, so it is key for you to find out the specific requirements of your buyer before you invest in seafood sustainability. There are a lot of different standards out there, as you may have found. So fisheries standards certify fisheries, which can entail a single fisheries company with several vessels or a group of companies working together. Aquaculture standards, on the other hand, certify farms or groups of farms. The largest global certification standard for wild-caught fisheries is the Marine Stewardship Council, or the MSC. And the largest 3 standards for aquaculture are BAP, Best Aquaculture Practices, Global GAP, and the ASC, the Aquaculture Stewardship Council. Sustainability certification communicates to the consumer that your seafood has been produced in a sustainable way. Certified seafood receives an eco label on the end product, which is what you see in the supermarket as a consumer. And through this eco label, consumers can recognize the difference between conventional seafood and sustainable seafood. The label also evokes trust as it demonstrates to the consumer that an independent organization has checked whether seafood has been produced in a sustainable and responsible way. Europe is home to the biggest concentration of certified products. According to a global benchmark made by the Seafood Certification and Ratings Collaboration in 2019, almost 2,100 different seafood products in Europe were certified and labeled. What we have noticed is that there's a gradual shift from retailers committing to selling seafood with specific eco labels to committing to selling seafood which is certified by any GSSI benchmark certification standard. So now I'm going to hand over to Eva to explain a little bit further what it is that GSSI does and what it is.
Thank you. So GSSI, I will tell a little bit more about what we do very briefly, but then dive into the benchmark tool, which is really strongly related to the work with certification. So really most relevant to understand the content of today's webinar. So GSSI is a partnership to accelerate seafood sustainability efforts by creating benchmark solutions to provide confidence, clarity, and choice. So that's quite a mouthful. So let me just unpack that a little bit for you. So there's 3 essential things in there to really understand about GSSI. First is that we are a partnership, and we are a partnership with not only public, but also with private organizations, with not-for-profit as well as commercial organizations. And we work together with this partnership on a pre-competitive basis. What we're working towards with them is the sustainability of seafood. So with them, we create a common understanding and language on sustainability of seafood. And then the third and final thing that's really important to understand is that we create global benchmark solutions to provide confidence, clarity, and choice in sustainable seafood. So benchmark solutions really help us to translate that common understanding and language of seafood sustainability into action, meaning that we're not only talking about sustainability of seafood production and sourcing, but also creating clear and efficient tools that our partners then use to make concise sustainability commitments, making it really tangible. So today I'll speak about one of these benchmark solutions specifically, which is what we refer to the global benchmark tool. So the global benchmark tool focuses specifically on the benchmarking of certification programs. So certification programs that have a standard on the environmental sustainability of seafood production. As Mariska mentioned, it could be either fisheries or we could be talking about an aquaculture standard. And the benchmarking of these certification programs means essentially that we're reviewing the program and assessing whether or not they are in alignment with that tool. So with the content that we've set out in our global benchmark tool, which is a set of criteria based on the UN FAO Code of Conduct on Responsible Fisheries and on the FAO Eco-Labeling Guidelines. So these UN FAO guidelines, they're very well known in the seafood sector, as they're really seen as the core guidelines to describe what a certification program should be doing to be able to say that the farm or the fisheries that they certify is really in alignment with the expectations of the consumers, but also of the sourcers of seafood when they want to commit to sourcing sustainable seafood only. So the benchmark tool, which is what you'll see at the top here of the slide, like I mentioned, based on the guidelines of the FAO, during a very extensive review process, which we undertake on an annual basis, we are reviewing the certification programs like an MSC, a BAP, or a global GAP, and then comparing it to that benchmark framework. In case the conclusion of that process, of that complete review, is that they are in full alignment with all the required criteria of our benchmark tool, it means that we now say that these programs are GSSI recognized. So this is to date the case for the 9 certification programs that you see outlined on the slide here. So some have a specific focus on fisheries. They only have a standard to certify fisheries. Others have an aquaculture focus, and there's some programs that have both an aquaculture as well as a fisheries standard. You'll also see some difference in terms of the region where these programs are active. Some are regional, really taking into account the local considerations of the seafood where they certify. But you'll also see that some of these programs are global, and those are probably the most well-known ones, like an MSC or a BAP, able to certify different species globally. So looking at this, we now know that there's a benchmark tool, and that the result of us at GSSI operating that tool is that we have a group of recognized certification programs, and because of that, we can say for all of these programs that these are credible and robust programs. And if you have a product that's certified under this, you can safely assume it's a product that's been produced and handled in a way that's sustainable. So this certainly provides clarity and confidence in these programs and the seafood that it has been certified under these. But how does the sector actually use this information? So for that, we'll take another step, and that is in sourcing policies. So at the bottom here, you'll see a few large retailers like Aldi, Ahold Delhaize, and Walmart. And these retailers, they make a reference to our benchmark tool in their sourcing policies. So in the past, if we go 10 years back in time, sourcing policies often reference maybe 1, maybe 2 certification programs, often only the programs that they had experience with or that happened to have a good reputation, but they weren't always sure which program to reference. There were a lot of different certification programs, and they were very unclear about what programs would be best to use, what programs were really ensuring them that the seafood would be sustainable. This was very confusing for the buyers, but it also had a lot of downsides for the producers. You saw that often the sources would reference specific certification programs, and because of that, at times producers needed to have their products certified under different programs. So this was really driving up the costs of offering a certified product, as you needed to pay for multiple audits. Or it could be that a producer would be forced by getting certified under a program that wasn't really the right fit for them, but it happened to be the one that their sourcer would require. So because we now have these retailers making a reference to GSSI, they're not referencing one specific program, but they're referencing the group of the GSSI recognized programs. So you'll see the wording in those references, it's slightly different, but the effect is always the same, namely that they accept all the programs, whether you are certified under ASC or BAP or Global GAP. The producer is free to make the choice that works best for them, that works best for the species they produce, that works best for their region, and they don't have to get certified by multiple programs. And in this way, we're really creating more efficiency, but also more clarity and choice in the seafood industry. So the list of retailers that reference us instead of referencing specific programs, it's a list that we're continuously working on to grow. But by now you can already find this reference in almost half of the major retailers globally, particularly in Europe, in the EU, or in the United States. So this is in a nutshell how the global benchmark tool works, and what the effect is for those that are producing and sourcing seafood and that are interested in certification. So I hope this has provided a clear overview of what we do here and how this could potentially help with market access. And if there's any further questions, please do let us know during the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eva, for your explanation. I look forward to hearing more about it during the Q&A. Let's dive a little deeper now into what it is that makes Europe an interesting market for sustainable seafood. Oh, sorry. So the demand for certified seafood is growing. This was even the case in 2020, when the world was hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. So around 890,000 tons of MSC certified seafood were sold on the European market in 2020, 13% more than the year before. If we look at the total products available on the market, the offer grew by 11% to reach almost 15,000 products. If we then looked at farm fish, almost 10,000 ASC certified products were available in Europe in 2020, which was 32% more than in 2019. Though the data I'm showing in this webinar mainly presents data provided by the ASC and MSC, other standards such as Global GAP and BAP are also growing in Europe. Data from BAP certified farmers shows us that about 25% of their products are now being sold on the European market. Now, the growth in certified products in 2020 can, to a certain extent, actually be explained by the pandemic. So consumers that normally ate seafood in restaurants started cooking it at home during the lockdowns. So people were spending money on seafood in the retail sector, which is the main end market for sustainable seafood. Though the food sector has since reopened, thankfully, retail sales remain high, so it is likely that the demand for certified products in Europe will continue to grow in the next couple of years. What we also see is that the food sector is displaying more and more interest in sustainable seafood as well. So as a result, we see a growing number of fish and seafood wholesalers like the Netherlands-based Eco Seafood or Jan van As, which are actually specialized in selling sustainable seafood. What this trend means for you is that the wholesale market is a potential future market for sustainable products as well. As I said before, European consumers are more and more interested in the sustainability of seafood. To understand consumer attitudes towards sustainable seafood more specifically, the Marine Stewardship Council partnered with GlobeScan in 2020 to conduct the third wave of a global study into consumer trends in sustainable diets and seafood consumption. Now, this study shows us that 2/3 of European consumers agree that in order to save the ocean, we have to consume fish that comes from sustainable sources. This shows us that consumers think that consuming sustainable seafood will help conserve marine resources. Just under 1/3 of seafood consumers in Europe think that their favorite fish species will no longer be available in 20 years from now. Consumers are worried that overfishing or other sustainable or unsustainable fishing and farming practices will lead to the extinction of certain species. Now, when these consumers were asked what are the most important drivers for buying seafood, whether or not seafood is sustainably sourced was actually more important to consumers than the price of seafood. So price ranked below sustainable sourcing to the European consumer. So now we know that European consumers are concerned with seafood sustainability. But in what region is this growing concern most prominent? Let's do a poll question to find out what you think about this. So my question to you is, in which region did the number of ASC and MSC labeled products grow the most in 2020? Is this Northwestern Europe? Is this Southern Europe? Or is this Eastern Europe? Please fill in your answer in the poll.
I will close the poll in a few seconds.
So thank you, Sana. Yeah, the outcome of the poll shows that most of you think that the number of ASC and MSC labeled products in 2020 grew the most in Northwestern Europe, that Eastern Europe was second place, and Southern Europe was third place. Now that's really interesting because the answer is actually Southern Europe. So though Northwestern Europe is still Europe's largest market for certified seafood, the growth of certified seafood available on shelves was actually highest in Southern Europe. So Europe's seafood market can best be broken down into these three markets that I just mentioned: Northwestern Europe, Southern Europe, and Eastern Europe. So for a long time, the trend of retailers making commitments to sell sustainable seafood was limited to Northwestern Europe and the Nordic countries. And as you can see in the graph, now sustainable seafood is also on the rise in Southern and Eastern Europe. Northwestern Europe is still your biggest market for sustainable seafood. This region's biggest importing countries are the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, Germany, and Belgium. Most retailers in this region now demand sustainability certification. It's become a basic requirement for a lot of retailers. Northwestern Europe accounts for the largest share of the European sales of MSC certified and ASC certified fish and seafood. Now, results from the 2020 European Barometer poll, which was carried out in 2020 in the 27 EU member states, demonstrates that Northwestern European consumers find low environmental impact an important characteristic of sustainable food. Overall, we can say that Northwestern Europeans are more willing to spend money on sustainably produced food than other European consumers do. So in 2020, there were about 6,300 MSC labeled products available on the Northwestern European market, which was a 6% increase from the previous year. The biggest selection of MSC label products are available in Germany, with almost 3,000 products on the shelves in 2020. If we look at total ASC certified products available in 2020 per country, the total number of different products available in Northwestern Europe was just over 7,700 products, which was a 27% increase when compared to 2019. And in Northwestern Europe, the biggest selection of ASC certified products are available in the Netherlands, with over 2,700 certified products on Dutch shelves in December 2020. As most of you may know, Southern Europe is the largest market for seafood in Europe. This region hosts Europe's top 3 importing nations: Spain, Italy, and France. Southern Europeans are increasingly demanding sustainable seafood. If more companies from the retail, food service, and processing sector in Southern Europe demand sustainable seafood, this could significantly increase the demand for sustainable seafood in all of Europe. Currently, only a few retailers in this region buy sustainable seafood, but their number is expected to grow in the coming years. In addition to this, this region processes a lot of seafood, which is re-exported for sale in the retail sector. Thus, if you sell raw material to the Southern European processing sector, be prepared for demands for sustainable seafood. As I mentioned, the growth of MSC certified and ASC certified seafood sold was mainly accounted for by Southern Europe. So in 2020, Southern Europe had almost 2,900 MSC certified products on the market, which was a 31% increase from the previous year. The number of MSC products available in France grew by 27%. It grew by 25% in Spain, but Italy made the greatest strides by far, with 49% more products on the market in 2020 when compared to the previous year. The amount of ASC certified products, on the other hand, on offer in the Southern European market increased the most, growing 46% and reaching to almost 2,600 products. And lastly, the biggest Southern European market for sustainable seafood is France, with almost 1,500 products available in December 2020. So now it's time for our Q&A.
Yes,
Please
thank you very much, Mariska and Eva. We indeed now have time for questions and answers about this first part of the webinar. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box. We already received a couple of interesting questions, which I would like to pose first. The first question is, do you think that certification will become compulsory for EU seafood imports in the future? Is that a question that you can answer, Mariska?
Yes. Yeah, thank you for that question. I think that it's not going to become compulsory in the next couple of years because it's very difficult to make something like this compulsory for all imports. However, under the European Green Deal, there's a lot of changes happening in terms of requirements for importing into Europe. And we do expect that the requirements are going to become more stringent. So it is going to become stricter. It's going to be more, yeah, the requirements are going to become more strict in the next couple of years. And the legislation has actually changed now. So it's a good idea to go on the EU website and check out what these new requirements are. And yeah, prepare yourself for these changing requirements.
Thank you. Eva, would you like to add to that, or maybe not so much?
No, thank you. It's I think that sums it up greatly. It's a very interesting question, and one I think, you know, it's a bit of an estimate, but I think that would definitely be our best understanding at this point to see where the future will lead us.
Okay, thank you. So I noticed I didn't turn my camera on yet. Thank you very much. Another question is, can you tell something about the difference between organic and sustainable seafood?
Yeah, so I'll take this one as well, I think. So it's a really good question. And the word sustainable is sometimes confused with the word organic. But it's important to realize that they don't have the same meaning. So sustainable seafood is farmed or caught using methods, like I said before, that don't harm a single species or an ecosystem. But organic seafood is actually always farmed. It's never caught. And the rules for producing organic seafood are more stringent than they are for sustainable seafood. And if you look at the situation in Europe, European legislation actually very specifically has rules on what you can call organic seafood that is sold in Europe. The market for sustainable seafood in Europe is much larger than it is for organic seafood. But it is important to remember that producers tend to receive significant price premiums for organic seafood, whilst producers rarely receive price premiums for sustainable seafood, or at least that's something that's definitely debatable. If you want to learn more about the difference between these two, please take a look at the CBI fact sheet on exporting organic seafood to Europe, which is coming out at the same time as the fact sheet on sustainable seafood.
Okay, thank you. Another what's the difference question. Can you tell more about the difference between improvement projects, fishery improvement projects, and certification? And maybe it's a question for Eva. What is GSSI opinion about fishery improvement projects?
Yeah, thanks. I think it makes most sense if I dive into that last question, and then I'll leave it to Mariska if maybe she wants to add something. So on speaking on behalf of GSSI, I would say, you know, our opinion is, yes, FIPS are really good means to sustainability as well, just as certification is. But they are definitely very different in terms of the assurance that you can expect. So I just spoke about our global benchmark tool. and that tool focuses solely on third-party certification programs. As an organization working towards more sustainable seafood, we look at benchmark solutions for different methods of achieving more sustainability in seafood production. So we recognize that there are certain areas where certification may not or may not yet be the solution for sustainability. This could be for different reasons. It could be that it's not available for a species. Sometimes that's something we've seen, or it's too costly for the size of the production, like sometimes with small-scale fisheries. So we have a different project that's specifically looking into different means of improving sustainability of seafood production, and FIPS and APES are definitely a very important element of the sustainable seafood movement. But I'll not dive into that too much now, as I think it's quite a different topic than certification. But if you are interested in learning more about what GSSI does there, please do reach out. But yeah, in conclusion, I'd say we see third-party certification recognized under a global benchmark tool really as a best practices, highest level of assurance you could get for seafood sustainability. And we often see, therefore, in sourcing policies that it's listed at the top. But that being said, we definitely understand that not all seafood is currently able to be certified, and that there's other means needed instead of closing the door. So there's other means needed, like FIPS, to achieve our goal of more sustainable seafood.
Thank you. Would you like to add anything, Mariska, or should we go to the next question?
I think we can go to the next question.
Okay. One other question that came in is, why are there so many criteria for sustainability, and why is it made so hard to comply? Is it for consumers' interest or to protect existing producers?
Eva, would you like to answer this, or shall I answer it?
Maybe you start and I'll dive in later.
Yeah, this is a really interesting question. So I think there's three things in there. One is why are the requirements so difficult? The second one is, and who is this for? Producers or consumers? Is that correct?
Yes, why is it so difficult indeed? And is it for consumer interest or to protect the existing producers? Yeah.
So I think that this question really goes to the beginning of certification, maybe even before certification. People started thinking about how to improve fisheries and aquaculture, because in the end, we want to produce more aquatic food to fill bellies, to feed the world. And this wasn't happening in a sustainable way. So one way to approach this is to, and I'm using the word better management practices, which is more focused on aquaculture, but bear with me with that. So governments and private organizations started thinking about how to define better management practices to ensure that production was happening in a more sustainable way, so that we can make sure that in the next couple of years that our children and our children's children can also enjoy aquatic resources. And this is also, of course, for the benefit of producers, because if a producer is managing their farm or their fisheries in a more sustainable way, then they'll produce more efficiently. So this is also for their benefit. And the development of certification standards, specifically private certification standards, is an effort to basically get consumers to pay for better management of aquaculture and fisheries. So I think that it's definitely not something that we should see as being the benefit of the consumer. I think it's the benefit of the environment and sustainability as a whole. And the idea is that producers that comply to these standards also improve their practices. However, it's true that requirements for certification standards are super stringent, it's also very expensive to comply to these requirements for smallholder producers. And as a result, a lot of smaller producers cannot afford to comply to these better management practices or to these standards. And that's why it's also, I think, seen as something that's difficult to comply to for producers, and why a lot of producers struggle. And there's a lot of debate in how we can make certification standards more applicable also for smaller producers. And some of the solutions which are being put forward by a lot of these certification standards are, for example, for aquaculture, standards are defining group certification so that smallholders can work together to reduce the cost of audits, to make it more accessible to smallholder producers. And you also have the FIPS and APES, which is what we were discussing in the last question, which are fishery improvement projects and aquaculture improvement projects that try and help smaller producers and smaller fishers to be able to work towards certification. Eva, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good explanation. And in terms of when looking at seafood, why it's so stringent, I generally always see two different things, and one is that seafood is just an incredibly complex product, whether you're talking about a farm product or a wild caught product. There is just quite a lot of details to look out for when you really want to talk about a sustainable product. And another element that in our work we experience a lot as well, and is another very important reason why we're benchmarking certification. So you think, why that add-on? Why is there another group looking at certification? And it's really because taking that step from writing down on paper what it should do, what is sustainable, to actually making sure that it's done in practice, so that they're not only writing down what they should do, but that they're actually doing that in practice. It requires quite a sophisticated checks and balances system, and I think that is throughout the whole sustainable seafood development in the past few decades. Just really the development, it's been quite gradual, and I think that's really just because that is what is needed for the retailers to really say to their consumers, yes, we understand the demands that you have for the sustainability. We understand you want to have a product that's not harming the environment. This is what we need to do. These are all the things that we need to have in place to be able to really ensure that. And otherwise, unfortunately, yeah, we have seen instances of that going wrong with greenwashing, etc. So.
Thank you both. It's time to move on to the second part of this webinar about trends in sustainable seafood, and also about organizing sustainability throughout the supply chain. So I would like to give the floor again to Mariska.
Great, thank you, Sanne. So if you read our reports on buyer requirements, market entry, and our fact sheets on specific seafood products on the CBI website, you will notice that buyer requirements for sustainability are increasing, and it is of course important to be aware of these. However, it's also good to understand a couple of overarching trends in seafood sustainability, as these may influence these types of requirements in the long term. So 3 key trends in the sustainable seafood market that we describe in the CBI fact sheet are being able to provide traceability of your products and demonstrating the social impact and carbon footprint of your organization. Now, over time, these may even become basic requirements as the EU increases their focus on seafood sustainability. That was one of the questions that was asked in the Q&A. And specifically in the context of the farm to fork strategy, which is what lies at the heart of the European Green Deal. So let's start with traceability. More and more European buyers look for suppliers that can provide traceability of their products. So traceability means being able to follow the movement of seafood along the supply chain And that way buyers can show their customers and also regulatory bodies where their seafood is coming from. This is essential in Europe. The EU is making a big effort to improve seafood traceability as part of the fight against illegal fishing and irresponsible production practices. So if you are considering to sell certified seafood, it is important to realize that providing traceability is essential. You will not find credible sustainability certification standards that do not include traceability requirements. In most sustainability certification standards, sorry, it's a mouthful, traceability is a key requirement through what they call a chain of custody standard. So this is a traceability and segregation standard that is applicable to the whole supply chain, from a certified farm or fishery to the end product, which is carrying the logo. So if you want to sell certified sustainable seafood, start with exploring whether your business is able to provide documentation on all the steps in the supply chain. Now, what we see is that seafood businesses use a variety of digital technologies for traceability. Blockchain and DNA technology are two commonly used technologies in the seafood sector. They can be used to monitor your supply chain and also digitize the information that you collect along the way. Now, concerns regarding the social welfare of workers engaged in the seafood industry have attracted attention from the media and civil society groups, as you are probably well aware. Now, as a result, consumers and buyers are increasingly concerned about the social impact of seafood production and also the story behind them. So how does this translate to certification standards? It is good to know that some sustainability certification standards, like the ones discussed in this fact sheet that the webinar is based on, actually include rules about social issues. So, for example, the ASC includes social content within their standard, and the MSC requires all MSC certified fisheries to report on the measures they have in place to mitigate the presence of forced or child labor, for example. However, it's important to be aware that sustainability certifications do not necessarily replace social certifications. So it is important to always check with your buyer what they require in terms of social certification. In some cases, buyers require specific standards that focus on social issues in supply chains. So for example, the SA 8000 is the world's leading social certification program. And the BSCI provides companies with a social auditing methodology that helps them improve working conditions in their supply chain. So bottom line is check with your buyers what they require for the seafood that they're buying from you. Now, last but not least, your carbon footprint is becoming a priority in sustainability as well. As concerns about climate change grow, it will become more and more important to prove that you have a low carbon footprint. In the global study about consumer trends in sustainable diets and seafood consumption conducted by GlobeScan that I mentioned before, climate change was actually considered the most important environmental issue by European consumers. What this trend means for you is that sustainability certification standards increasingly include rules about carbon emissions. So for example, standards like ASC actually require farms to monitor their energy use and emissions. Therefore, if you are considering certification for your own company, take a close look at what the standards require in terms of carbon footprints and find out if this is something that is feasible for you. Being able to monitor your carbon emissions may actually provide your company with a competitive advantage that goes beyond the requirements in certification. European buyers are making commitments to minimize their carbon emissions, and they're communicating about this actively. So for example, Walmart, the world's largest retailers with stores in the UK, targets zero emissions across all global operations by 2040. Dutch retailer Albert Heijn announced that they have reduced their CO2 emissions by 50% per shop, and they're working with suppliers and farmers and fishers to reduce carbon emissions throughout their supply chains. So with buyers making these types of commitments, this could mean increasing buyer requirements for the reduction of carbon footprints for suppliers such as yourself. This could mean that in the future, exporters that are able to keep track of their carbon emissions and communicate these might actually have a competitive advantage. So now I'm going to dive into the last part of this webinar, which is about organizing sustainability throughout your supply chain. To begin with, there are many different seafood certification standards, and they all work differently, and it is not easy to navigate your way through them. However, there are a number of different aspects of the certification process that are relatively common throughout all standards, which are described in the fact sheet on the CBI website. So before applying for certification, it is important to start assessing which certification standard is most relevant and beneficial to you and your company. So to understand the characteristics of the GSSI benchmark certification standards, we have conducted a survey amongst these different standards, and a compilation of responses from the different standards is given in the fact sheet. So for more details on the specific process for certification of MSC, BAP, Global GAP, and ASC, take a close look at this overview and you can find detailed information about these different standards. Something important to keep in mind is that the cost of certification is high, which I mentioned in the Q&A. So the return on investment may not be high enough due to operational costs, costs associated with certification like audits, and other possible investments that you need to make to prepare your company for certification. Therefore, it is important to talk to your buyers, find out what the market is for sustainable products, and actually do a cost-benefit analysis before you apply for sustainability certification to figure out if it's feasible for you. In addition to this, different standards provide tools for producers to conduct a gap analysis to figure out how far away they're actually from certification. And also in our overview, you can see how different standards provide specific tools for these gap analyses. So my advice would be do this gap analysis before you take things further. Now, when choosing which standard is most suitable, it is important to understand that some certifications define one standard for multiple species, and other standards define species-specific standards. So the MSC sets one standard for sustainable fishing and has some specific moderations for certain fish species. Similarly, Global GAP has one defined standard that is applicable to multiple species. BAP has a farm standard that is applicable to multiple species, but they also have some species-specific farm standards. And ASC lastly has species-specific standards. Now, certification standards also provide assurance about sustainable conducts in other parts of the supply chain, which means your supply chain partners need to be certified as well. Therefore, it is important to assess whether these partners have the capacity to become certified. To do this, it is important to understand that certification standards provide assurance in the supply chain in different ways. So, for example, MSC and ASC work with a chain of custody certification. All supply chain partners that manipulate fish need to be certified against the chain of custody standard to make sure that no substitution is taking place. The same chain of custody standard is used for ASC and for MSC. And similarly, Global GAP has a separate chain of custody standard. BAP, on the other hand, has standards for each part of the supply chain and therefore has a processing plant standard. So they actually work with a STAR system, which indicates how many parts of the supply chain is certified. One of the primary characteristics that make people trust certification standard is that they are audited by an external and therefore independent body, referred to as a certification body. Now, the audit is actually one of the most costly components of the certification process, and it is important to find out whether you are able to cover these costs. The cost of the audit is always paid by the producer, so this means the farm or the fisheries, to the certification body. And this payment is made regardless of the outcome of the audit or the final certification decision. As I mentioned before, some aquaculture standards actually offer options for group certification so that small farmers can share the costs for certification. Also keep in mind that sometimes processors are willing to sponsor the certification of producers if this leads to stable supply of sustainable products. So that's also something that's worth looking into. And lastly, it is important to understand the rules for using logos. As you see in the supermarket, certified products available to the end consumer carry a logo or a label. Some standards charge a fee for using this logo, whilst others do not. So for the MSC and ASC, the companies that use the label on consumer-facing products or the license holder, which is generally the processor, since they apply the logo to the package, must pay annual fees and royalties. For Global Gap, though, there are no logo licensing fees. And for Global Gap, there are registration fees and volume-based fees for those using the label. And there are different rules for different actors along the supply chain. And again, for more details, I suggest that you look at the overview in our fact sheet so you can see the differences between the different standards. So with that, I end our presentation, and I'm looking forward to some more questions from the audience.
Yes, thank you very much, Mariska. That was very interesting. We indeed have now time for another couple of questions, and also Eva, welcome again to help answering them. I'm not sure if we will be able to answer all the questions that came in, but we will do our best to address the questions that are interesting to the entire audience. Mariska, you told us a lot about the costs already for getting certified, but can you give an indication of the costs of certification?
That's a good question, and I can't give an average indication for the cost of certification. I think if you want an estimation, it's important to go to the actual separate certification standards and find out what's valid for the specific standards.
Okay. And then another question that came in is, where can I obtain the overview of different characteristics of the GSSI benchmark standards? So that's a question for you, Eva.
Thanks, Sanne. Yeah, so on the GSSI website, which is ourgssi.org, we have a dedicated page which has an overview of all the recognized programs, the standards that are included in the recognition, the exact version, the last time they had a benchmark process. Like I mentioned, this is on an annual basis. And this is also where we publish a benchmark report. And a benchmark report is a really good report if you want to get a better insight of how the certification program works, because it's basically a summary including the complete results. I say summary, but I should warn you, it is quite a comprehensive document since it includes the results of the complete benchmarking process. So it really shows why we have come to the conclusion that a certification program is in alignment with the criteria that we have set, and because of that, why we think it is credible. As I indicated, the recognition by us, it really means that you meet the required content of our benchmark framework of those criteria. But we also, on top of that, have additional criteria because we recognize that the programs are different. We encourage even that there is that difference, because we don't believe there is necessarily a one-size-fits-all solution to seafood sustainability. It's great that there are different certification programs with different approaches. We require that they meet that minimum level, that they meet the required content of the benchmark tool, but on top of that, they could also apply to get recognition for some supplementary optional criteria that we have included in our benchmark tool. So in case this is on certain topics that really goes the extra mile on top of what's really demanded by retailers, but in case a certain program is particularly strong on animal welfare, for instance, you will be able to see that in the supplementary criteria. So if you go to the benchmark report and you go to the topic of animal health and welfare, then you would see, okay, is it only in alignment with the required criteria, or do I also find some additional criteria, some supplementary criteria? And then you know, okay, for this certification program, this is an important focus. They really go the extra mile here. Well, others may not. But yeah, on the website, that would really be the starting point to get the overview. And if you say, well, I'm really interested in global gap, for instance, I really want to understand it better before I contact them, then I would recommend go to the benchmark report and have a look there at the topics that you're interested in.
Thank you very much. Another question is from a producer, I think from Vietnam, saying, my products have a Viet Gap certification. Can this also be GSSI benchmarked?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I do believe, I'm not 100% certain, but I do believe that Viet Gap is a third-party certification program, which is great because that is the type of program that we benchmark. So the ones with a third-party system, meaning that they have a scheme owner, then a separate accreditation body, and then a separate certification body. And if they are a program that works like that, they would be able to apply for GSSI benchmarking. They have not done that. That's why they're not included in the group. But we really encourage all the programs that would be able to get the recognition, that feel that they're strong enough, that they're really providing that level of assurance that the benchmark tool ensures, to apply to a benchmark process. It's a voluntary process, so the fact that they're not recognized does not necessarily mean that we say they are not in alignment. It means they have not applied or have applied but not successfully been benchmarked. So if you work with a certification program that's not benchmarked, definitely encourage them to get benchmarked, because that would mean that your product certified under that standard that apparently works well for you, that would get included in those same sourcing policies.
Yes, thank you. Maybe to add to that, another participant asked about the certifications RFVS or BSP. Do you know about them too?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with BSP. I did see the question come in. RFVS, we are familiar with them, but they have, so I've been talking about programs recognized under the Global Benchmark Tool, and they all have an environmental focus. So their standards look at environmental sustainability considerations. The RFVS program looks at social considerations. So they don't look at environmental considerations when you're fishing, but they look specifically at labor conditions, so consecutive days at sea, forced labor, minimum age of work, etc. And that is a program that has applied to get SSCI recognition, which is a different benchmarking process with a specific focus on social consideration, but it basically would work the exact same way as the global benchmark tool. But the reason why they're not included as a GSSI recognized program and why they also would not be in the future is because they have a different focus. Now we're looking at environmental sustainability. RFVS looks at social sustainability.
Okay, thank you. Then a question, I think for Mariska. You mentioned that it is best to talk to the buyer before embarking on the relevant set of standards for your company. But in reality, buyers will not talk if you don't have a standard first. Can you comment on that? Do you understand the question, or should I repeat it?
No, I do not. Could you repeat that?
So you mentioned that it is best to talk to the buyers before embarking on the relevant set of standards. So which certification to aim for.
Yep.
But in reality, this producer is encountering that buyers do not want to talk unless you already have a certain certification in place.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if that's the case, then it's quite clear that this buyer is only selling to markets that require certified products. I think then the next step would be find out where your buyer is selling to. Is it the North American market? Is it the European market? To figure out which types of standards are required in those markets.
Okay, thank you. And maybe to add, Eva, can you tell a little bit more about the focus of the GSSI? Is that global or only for Europe? It has global in the name, so I guess global.
Yeah, you spotted that well. We are indeed, we're based in Europe, but we are a global program. So that means that both the partnership that we work with is global. We currently have representation in all of the continents. And you'll see that, you know, the headquarters are spread out over the world, the operations of where they fish and farm even further. So really a global network, but also the solutions that we offer, those benchmark solutions, they have a very strong global focus as well. We want to make sure that we are offering the clarity, but also the choice. So making sure that we provide solutions to our partners that are very clear to them because they only have to make that one reference, but that are actually really helping globally to provide market access from different producing regions. So having that flexibility there in terms of you know, where the product is produced, it's really at the core of what we do.
Thank you. Okay. Then another question, I think for Mariska, because you mentioned it very briefly. Are prices higher for certified seafood products?
Yeah, that's a good question. And we actually did some market research to answer this question in the fact sheet, because what you do see is that in general, the prices of certified seafood in the supermarket are higher than the prices of conventional or non-certified seafood. So the answer is yes, the consumer-facing prices for certified seafood products tend to be higher.
Okay, so the prices tend to be higher, but then on the I think I remember you said that the premium is less or not much higher than.
So the price premium in certification is something that has been debated a lot, and you often hear producers complain that they don't receive a price premium for the certified products that they sell, that in fact they sell their conventional products for the same price as the certified products. There's many different opinions about this, but that is something that you hear producers saying often. And I think that bottom line, it is important for producers to see certification as a means of market access. So not as a means of receiving a price premium. And I'm not saying that they never do, because of course there are situations where producers do receive a price premium, but it's not always the case. So our advice is for producers, see certification as a way towards market access to new markets, to markets that require certification.
Okay, thank you very much. Then I think, we have come to the end of this webinar. I hope that most of the questions that you put in the chat box have been answered to your satisfaction. If you still have any questions, you may find answers on CBI's Market Intelligence platform. A couple of times we already mentioned the fact sheet that we will publish very soon on our website about certified sustainable seafood, and also another fact sheet about organic seafood will be available online soon. So this is all part of CBI's market intelligence. And as I mentioned in the beginning of this webinar, CBI offers this free market research for different sectors, and among others for the fish and seafood sector. And it's specifically aimed at products from Africa, Asia, and Central America. And as you can see here on this slide, we have different types of market studies. I can also share with you our website so you can see. So I will quickly change the presenter rights, show my screen. Let me see. And then this one. Yes, so this is our website from CBI. So you see our URL, cbi.eu/marketinformation/fish seafood. Well, there's an introduction, there are sector studies. So what is the demand for seafood, fish and seafood on the European market? Which trends offer opportunities? What requirements should your product comply with? We also have different tips studies, tips to find buyers, tips to do business, how to digitalize your operations, and how to organize your export more practically. And we do have a number of studies that are product studies focused on a specific species. For example, tuna or crab. Well, you can see them here. Organic seafood, this one is still a little bit older, from 2018. It will be replaced very soon. And also the fact sheet that we mentioned a couple of times will be published here. So if you want to stay up to date about our new publications, you can subscribe to our newsletter, which is you can subscribe here. And then I will give back the presenter rights back to Mariska. Okay, Mariska, can you share the presentation once again? Yeah, so now that we have really come to the end of this webinar, I would once again like to thank our speakers, Mariska Bottema, and particularly our guest speaker, Eva van Heukelom, for sharing all the information with us. And also I would like to thank you, our audience, for attending this webinar. Please let us know if you found this webinar useful and if you have any feedback to us by filling in the survey that is coming up as soon as the webinar ends. And on behalf of CBI, I wish you best of luck with exporting to the European fish and seafood markets with getting certified, hopefully. And lastly, I would like to wish you a very nice day. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.